Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You are listening to another installment of the NTC podcast, episode 66, sponsored by Sports Business Classroom. Aaron Washington here, your host, joined by Aaron Pearlstein. We are both very excited to be back on another podcast. This one's exciting. We are leading up into the play-in tournament as of this recording. We are about 3 days away from the play-in tournament, and we have about 1 day left in the regular season. So really exciting times coming in the NBA. A lot of exciting matchups coming, specifically for the playoffs. We will get into those a little bit later on in this podcast. But first things first, Aaron, CBA agreement came out last week, as we know. On our last podcast, if you guys have not seen that podcast, I encourage you to check that out, episode 65. That was with Michael Vorkunov of The Athletic. He's been the one reporting a lot of these changes coming up in the CBA agreement. He covered them extensively, and we talked to him a little bit about some of the things that were changed. But in this podcast, this is going to be like a part two. This is where we're going to look at some of the other changes that we didn't get to last time. We're excited to get into that here. So, Aaron, it's been a long time coming here for this new CBA. There have been rumors about it for quite a while, but I'm glad that they came to an agreement so we don't have a lockout because we're basketball junkies, man. We don't want basketball to stop. So the fact that it's going to keep rolling on to the next agreement, it's really exciting to see.
Absolutely, absolutely. It definitely was nice to see, even though they got to the basically 11th minute or 11th hour, really. It's nice. I heard that the term sheet hasn't even gotten to the teams yet, which is, but I'm excited that they came to agreement as well, and there are definitely a lot of new changes that's going to have a lot of implications on the game and the way that you kind of facilitate management. So it's going to be a new age, and it's exciting.
It is extremely exciting. So stay tuned, guys. There's going to be probably more to come. This is a tentative agreement. As Aaron said, it hasn't made it to the teams yet. I mean, there's still like some fine tuning, I'm sure, to be done here. But the overall gist of this has been completed. So that's what we're going to get into right now. So to kick things off, I think this is one of the biggest topics here that we're going to cover in this new CBA. This is the additional tax apron that was added. This is going to apply to teams that do dip into the luxury tax. So, Aaron, as you probably already know, there is a tax apron associated to the luxury tax. So, for our listeners here, there's a luxury tax that begins to penalize teams. For every dollar you spend, you're going to spend an additional amount. And the farther you go into the tax, it gets more and more restrictive as you go up. The league already had installed an apron, which is $6 million above the luxury tax, to penalize teams that spend even more over the tax. There are certain restrictions associated with that. Now in this new agreement in the CBA as of next season, there's going to be even more penalties associated with the second tax apron, which Woj reported is 17.5 million over the luxury tax line. So what this involves here, this is pretty insane. I didn't think it would be this restrictive. But number one, you cannot send back money in trades. That's pretty significant. Number two, you cannot trade first-round picks 7 years out. So there's a 7-year rule that basically means you can't trade picks more than 7 years into the future. So if you're trying to use picks like 29, 30 out in the future, you're no longer able to trade those. So the amount of trades you can make is significantly reduced, especially if your earlier picks are already kind of tied up and you can't trade them. And then the third one, I didn't see this coming. I don't know about you, Aaron, but you can't sign players in the buyout market anymore. So if a guy gets bought out, it's a John Wall, it's a Reggie Jackson type of player, and you want to bolster your rotation a little bit with your depth, you no longer have that ability. You can't do that either if you're looking to do that. So just as a reference, like about 3 teams on average are in this area every season. So it's not like it's going to affect everybody. It's actually a very small percentage. But usually those teams that are in that bracket are like the Warriors, the Clippers, the Nets before they traded their big 3. These are teams that are trying to compete for a championship. So the fact that these restrictions are put into place, it's definitely going to limit them a lot more. And it's going to affect their chances at building that championship contender and making a deep run. So I think this is one of the biggest stories of the new CBA.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to put it into context, so that would mean that the Kevin Durant to the Suns trade, as well as the James Harden to the Sixers trade from 2 years ago, would not be allowed to be completed because there was cash involved, as well as first round picks 7 years out when one of them was well above the second tax apron. So Um, it makes sense. It starts to force a lot of teams to smart spend instead of just kind of um, keeping their homegrown talent and continuing to give them, the amount of money they can with their bird rights and their owner just, you know, going $300 million in the tax. But at the same time, if you have a team like the Warriors, um, and you're not looking to sign buyout players, or you're not looking to make any trades, and you feel like you have a championship contending team, you still can go over this second tax apron and
Sure.
just take the risk. But at the same time, it's now less advantageous for the team. Before it was just the $2 on a dollar, where if you have an owner like Joe Lacob, well, if he's willing to do it, he's willing to do it. So, but now, obviously you lose out on a lot of key things. And I mean, the buyout one, it was definitely surprising me, but it makes sense. You can
Hmm.
always sign a player for a minimum contract. And, now this implicates just getting talent from a team that their roster didn't pan out and they're getting a big contract off their books. Um, someone that far into the tax usually should be able to sign a minimum contract, but not allowing them to makes sense.
It does. Yeah, all these changes are, I mean, it definitely makes sense to add these changes in. Because, like you said, if the teams have an owner that's willing enough, like Steve Ballmer for the Clippers, we all know this man has like infinite amounts of money. So he's going to go out there and spend however many hundreds of millions of dollars to make a team into the type of team it needs to be to compete for a championship. But it's different when there are actual restrictions, like not just like, oh, you can't spend this amount of money, but it's like, hey, you can't trade certain picks anymore,
Right.
or you can't sign certain guys. Like you're correct, you can still sign guys using the minimum, the exception, the veterans minimum, but typically those players that are bought out are a little bit more sought after, might be a little bit better in terms of what they have left in the tank. Then guys are just minimums, like I think that's why they did it. So it's like you could still sign minimums, but like those high profile players, like the John Walls and everything, those are the guys you're going to be restricted from signing. So I think teams are going to think twice before going into that second apron. It's still going to happen, and especially if they already have a roster they like
Right.
and they're willing to spend the money. But it is going to restrict teams a little bit more. So I'm interested to see if we still see about 3 teams per season in this area, or maybe it goes to 1 or 2 or none. That would be interesting. But for the teams that are already spending that amount of money, maybe like the Clippers or something like that, they might stay there. But I wonder how long that'll go on for, because of course there is the repeater tax, and that just gets really restrictive if you're into that area. So it could get super damaging to a team's bottom line if they do this year over year.
Right. Right.
So just for context, like this luxury tax this past season was 150 million. The apron was 156, and then if you add on about 17 million onto that, we're looking at about I think 173 or so
Yep.
million, 174 for the apron. Obviously, next year the cap is going to go up by whatever percentage, 7-8%. Um, but just looking at how the apron could impact teams is going to be very interesting. We definitely got to keep an eye on that one. So it looks like what the league is trying to do is to penalize teams that spend an extravagant amount of money, but they want to reward teams that are more careful with how they spend money. They stay within the normal tax, still going to the apron, maybe just above the salary cap itself. So that brings us to another big development. This is the mid-level exception and the room exception that do increase. So the mid-level exception and room exception, they're already determined before the season starts. Those are predetermined amounts. This past season, it was about 9.5 million for the mid-level exception, the full mid-level. So you don't go over that apron and then you're into the tax territory. It reduces that amount. And then the room exception, that applies to teams that are under the salary cap. So you don't have the mid-level, but you have the room exception. That was about 5.4 million. So just for reference, the mid-level exception is going to go up by 7.5% next year. So if we use this year's mid-level and add on 7.5%, we're looking at about 10.2 million. And then if we add on 30%, so the room exception goes up by 30%. That's a really big jump for those teams that are under the cap. That goes from 5.4 million to 7 million. So that's a pretty big jump for them as well. So mid levels are about 4 years max. You can offer a guy with the mid level, and the room exception is only 2 years. So that's really big for those teams that spend less than the tax. They're more careful with their money. And the league is trying to say, hey, here's some extra money you can use to go and sign guys because you're doing so well with your money. Is that the kind of same vibe you're getting from the league penalizing the tax more and then adding on more money to teams
Yeah,
that want to use a mid level?
absolutely. I think that is definitely spot on. I think it's kind of just saying, this exception that every team is allowed. We're increasing the cap. We're putting more, penalties on guys that are teams that are spending a lot. But now you get this kind of room exception that if you stay under the tax, you get to use, and it's just another incentive to be able to, smartly spend your money, because usually there's obviously the room, then there's the non-tax mid-level exception, then there's the taxpayer mid-level exception, and now with the new tax apron and the more stingy rules, not getting that room exception that's now an increase by 30% means a lot more than it did prior years.
Exactly. And the room exception is another exception that's kind of rare. You don't see it used that often because you have to be under the salary cap. And most teams do go over the cap, not necessarily the tax, but the cap itself.
Mm-hmm.
We probably only see a few teams that are under the cap. I mean, we're talking about teams like the Indiana Pacers, the San Antonio Spurs, teams that are pretty low in the standings that don't have any reason to spend a lot of money because they're not going to be competitive anyway. So that doesn't apply to a lot of teams, but the few that are under that, it does give them a boost. So
Yep.
if we split it up, it seems like you have a few teams below the cap that are going to use the room exception. The vast majority are going to be between the cap and the tax. That's going to make up probably, I would say, like 80% of all the teams in the NBA. And then you have those teams that are going to be into the tax territory that might be near the apron. It's another small percentage. So it seems like that's kind of how teams are divided in the NBA. But it is interesting to see because like really good players are signed with the mid-level exception. So the fact that they're getting more money, that middle class of player,
Yep.
that's going to end up probably being like 11 to 12 million next season. I mean, that's a good amount of money. Guys are going to be enticed by that.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think it was you on Twitter that made this distinction that, rookie contracts are really, coming up to the level of the exceptions,
Right.
in terms of average annual value. And I totally understand why the teams want veterans that have been in the league for very long to get more than the standard contract that a 19-year-old gets when he comes into the league. So doing this, it does create that more of a divide that makes a lot more sense than it did, based on just the inflation of everything. It was getting pretty close,
Yeah,
especially the first pick. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, I mentioned it on Twitter because I noticed that the first year salary for Paolo Banchero, the number one pick for the Magic, he's at 11 million to start.
Right.
He's a rookie. I mean, obviously he's worth the money. He has been worth that money easily because he's the most likely rookie of the year. He's been fantastic. But I mean, now he's making more. And I just referenced the mid-level exception before. I mean, that was 9.4, not even 10
Right.
million. So
Right.
now it's like, okay, guys that come into the league, you're a top three pick, you're making more money than the mid-level exception guys who, obviously aren't like superstars or anything, and they're not going to transform your entire franchise,
But
but
they've
they're
been in the league.
still
Yeah.
exactly, yeah. You guys have been in the league for several years. You're very impactful. You could come in and make a big difference for a team. So, I do think the league wanted to level the playing field a little bit. They are trying to foster more, I guess, growth from the young players, as evidenced by like the two-way contracts, the G League getting more emphasis, but
Yep.
also the guys that have been in the league for a while. You want to take care of them. You want to make sure that they're paid fairly for their services and they're enticed to sign those contracts for teams that are between the tax and the apron somewhere in there. The team should be rewarded and the veteran should be rewarded simultaneously.
Yep. Agreed.
So definitely wanted to touch on that because those contracts are very valuable and we're going to see a lot of those signed in the next few years. So, while we're on the topic of veterans, I mean, there are guys in the league here, Aaron, that they've been in the league for quite a while. The mid-level guys are not going to be the stars, but what about our stars? Like, how are they taken care of? How are they been serviced in this new CBA? Well, they have been thought of as well. They're the ones that drive the league, so it's only fair. But all NBA teams are now positionless. So typically we've had the guards, the forwards, and the centers divided up in all NBA. What this has meant, because like in this era specifically in the NBA, we've had centers that are very talented. We've had Jokic, we've had Embiid. So now it's like, hey, only one of those guys can make first team.
Yep.
But I mean, I think that we're all in agreement that Embiid's a first team type of guy. He shouldn't be second team. You know,
Agreed.
it doesn't seem fair for him. So they've taken care of that now. So if you want to vote Embiid and Jokic on the first team, you could do that. It could be a team of all centers and forwards, no guards. You know, that's eliminated. But what I wanted to ask you, because this is interesting, I mean, obviously in the modern NBA, we're getting towards a positionless league. So it's not like, okay, you're a point, you're a shooting guard, you're a small forward. Those lines are getting blurred. But we still typically have like front courts and back courts in the NBA. It's like, okay, Jalen Brunson is not going to be playing a center. You know,
Hmm. Right.
Joel Embiid's not a guard. You know, he kind of plays like a guard sometimes, but there's still some lines as far as positional limits go. So if we're up to you, would you rather keep this format of positionless completely, or would you want to see like at least like front court, back court, like we see in like All-Star voting?
Honestly, I wasn't a big fan of this change, mostly because I don't think it was the right thing to change. Um, the biggest implication, people care about these rosters because they have contract implications. There are incentives involved about making a specific team or
Mm-hmm.
making a team at all. So obviously it's going to be very hard. Like someone like you said, Embiid and Jokic, one of them has to make the second team. But if they have that incentive in their contract, I mean, even though that they're 1 and 2 in MVP voting, one of them doesn't get that extra incentive because they didn't make the first team. So
Mm-hmm.
um, that's why this change was made, because obviously one agents or teams were complaining about it, but I would rather take away the ability to make that an incentive than change it to positionless, because I think the idea of an All NBA team, it was kind of like a starting lineup. Like this is the starting lineup of the best players in the league, and I understand.
Mm-hmm.
And front court, back court, that would make sense, and I think I'd be for that. But the positionless, it's more like, okay, here are the top 5 players in the league. Like
Right.
it doesn't mean as much, and I think the decision should have been it can't be used as an incentive anymore.
That's an interesting thought. I haven't heard anybody kind of like suggest that, but I mean, I do like that. The fact that you can, you're trying to change not the All NBA, I guess, positional requirements, but rather the stipulation that it can be used as an incentive in a contract.
Right.
That's pretty interesting, for sure. I mean, there are a lot of different areas of the game that can be used as incentives. It could be games played. It could be a certain percentage from the field shot. It could be rebound percentage. It could be almost anything.
Right.
Uh, but all NBA, it's one of those things where it's like it's not an objective, measure. It's like it's more of like guys, people vote, and some people will put a guy on the first team. Some people put him on the second team. It's a subjective decision. So the fact that can affect pretty widely, like vary the amount of money you make on your next contract is pretty interesting.
Yep.
If you don't make an All NBA team, let's say you're between third team and you don't make it at all. Like I think Bradley Beal a few years ago. I mean, that could be tens of millions of dollars that you lose if, let's say, one voter doesn't put you on the third team. It's a
Hmm.
pretty big thing. So I see where you're coming from. But I think at the very least, more than I thought about it, I was like, all the All-Star teams are front court, back court, and you can still have
That's true.
Embiid and Jokic on the same team. So, we can still give the guards their, I guess, ability to make it like strictly for them,
Right.
but you're not completely just opening up like Bedore's box, I guess, so to speak, in terms of letting anybody make it. So, I mean, I definitely
Right.
see where you're coming from.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly.
So all NBA is definitely a big topic here. And what's kind of associated with that is the games played minimum to be eligible for all NBA. So now we're getting into the 65 game minimum. off the bat, when I saw that, I like the fact that they're trying to encourage stars to play more games because right
Hmm.
now it's like, even the biggest stars in the league, we would like to see them play a little bit more.
Right.
My concern is that maybe it's a little bit too high. I know it might kind of sound crazy because you're still missing 17 games, but John Hollinger had an article on the Athletic about this, and he mentioned that Curry, John Morant, and LeBron James, Davis, Lillard, Kawhi, Durant, Kyrie, Booker, none of them have played 65 games.
Right.
So they would all be eliminated from All NBA. Jaren Jackson Jr., James Harden, none of them will be eligible because they missed too many games. So I wonder if by introducing this limit, which I'm a fan of a limit, but maybe 65 games is a little too much. Maybe 60 would be better because a lot more of these guys would be eligible if it was 60 instead of 65. That's where I'm coming from. I just don't want to see all NBA teams where you have tier two players make it just
Yeah.
because they play like two or three more games. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Right. No, absolutely. And I think uh, the you know not being very excited about this specific rule makes sense to me. I also think it's hard to bring up those guys not playing 65 games because that's the reason why the rule was put in place because
Mm-hmm.
none of those guys did it this year, and they're like, well, we want that, and
Yeah.
there had to be some kind of load management um, rule in this upcoming CBA. I heard CJ McCollum talk live at the Old Man and the Three live podcast in New Orleans. And, I could tell that it was a big thing that they were discussing. And, if he was able to go for this, it's good. But um, I think it's actually going to be okay. I think it's going to make them have to qualify for more. And but at the same time, like I said before, I still think the problem with these stuff is that there's incentives involved. I would rather no contract implications occur because now I there's going to be loopholes where they check in and foul someone and they go out, or
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
they overwork themselves and get hurt. So
Mm-hmm.
and they're doing that specifically because there is an incentive in their contract, or they really need to make that all NBA or MVPs for their next contract. But um, yeah, so I would like to see the implications go away for the contract, but there are definitely some situations where this could go downhill for sure.
I'm glad you brought up the Drew Holiday expedition from last season. I think it was like one of the last games of the season where he checked in. He
Yeah,
had the opening tip and then he fouled. Uh,
right.
and it comes back to incentives because he had that $250,000 incentive in his contract that
Yeah,
he would only get if he played a certain amount of games. I can't remember if it was 65. It might have been 65. But
yeah,
to get that
something like that.
amount, yep, he had to play that game, which he played, but he played like 5 seconds and subbed right
Right.
out. Um, I was worried about that too. This is interesting. I don't know the specifics on this, but John Hollinger did modify his article a little bit. He edited it to include the fact that there's going to be some kind of safeguard against that in this agreement. So I
Okay.
don't know if that means you have to play a certain amount of minutes to qualify for a game. Let's say you check in, you play 5 minutes, and I don't know, you just want to leave the game. Maybe it doesn't count. I'm not sure how they're going to do that, but he did say, I guess he heard from a source close to the situation that there is going to be a way to safeguard against that. So at least we won't have to worry about that because I
That's
thought
true.
about that too. That's definitely a way guys can get around that. And they would do it. I 100% think they would do it just to get out
Absolutely.
of playing an entire game.
Absolutely. I agree. I think they
And
absolutely would.
yeah, because players are smart. These guys are in a position for a reason. That's something about players I think we underrate is their ability to not just like perform with their bodies, but perform with their minds. And don't think of everything. And the other concern you brought up was the fact that they might overexert themselves. I thought about that as well. And it's possible if a guy is hurt, but he has 3 games left to hit the minimum, there's 4 games left in the season. Okay, I can make it through, but what does that do to a team's playoff implications? Like, is a guy going to go into the playoffs injured now because he wanted to get All NBA or MVP or something? That's something else that could have unintended consequences, and I hope it doesn't hurt the overall postseason product of the NBA just because a guy wants to qualify for a major award.
Yep. No, absolutely. I agree.
We got to think about that too as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a lot to unpack here, a lot of information here, but I think the overall consensus is I think it's kind of a wait and see with some of this stuff, the games played. And one other thing I wanted to touch on, you mentioned the fact that a lot of guys haven't hit that, and they're trying to address that. Some of these guys, I think, didn't hit 65 games, not because they load managed, but just because they got hurt. Devin Booker in particular, Anthony Davis in particular, they missed a lot of time just because they got hurt, not necessarily because they load managed. Maybe Kawhi's a different story. He definitely load managed. I'll give him that one. But Curry, I think, had two different injuries to where he missed several games.
Right.
LeBron James definitely missed some games because of that. So those guys, I just want there to be enough of a buffer so that if guys do just get hurt, they don't automatically miss on the award. Just because they had an unfortunate ankle roll or something like that, not just because they intentionally miss games because they want to rest or something like that. I guess that's the only thing I thought of when it comes to the games play minimum.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah.
So positionless all NBA, that's definitely a big one. So how about this one? Get back to the money of things because it's a business and we got to talk about the money involved in this, man. Salary cap smoothing. It's another big topic.
Yeah.
If we flash back to 2016, the summer of Mozgov, the summer of Wall Dang,
Chandler Parsons.
Chandler Parsons. Oh my goodness! I mean, he just straight up robbed. What team was that? Was that the Mavericks that he signed
That
with?
was
Or
actually the Grizzlies.
Grizzlies. That's right.
John Hollinger was in the front office at that time.
That's true.
And
that's true.
Yeah. So it makes sense. This obviously was an ongoing discussion since 2016. The smoothing of the cap, where a new TV deal will be added incrementally to different years instead of just 1 year going in, because we saw it. There was what was the jump? I think I saw like $24 million from 1 year to the next.
It was 24 million. Yeah, a 32% increase in salary cap year over year.
Right. So
insane.
That only means that the free agents are getting the ones paid, but this now salary cap smoothing means that everyone and every player will be implicated by the new TV deal. That's increasing the revenue, and I'm really, really surprised owners went for this. I'm really surprised that the guys that ponied up the money to buy the team went for this. But it's a great thing for the players. I didn't really understand why Draymond had a problem with it. I think it's a huge win for them. It's been discussed for a long time, and now this just means that everything is going to increase by the percentage that they decide. That means the exceptions will increase by that much, and the cap room and the luxury tax, and you really won't see a free agency that really messed up so many teams' salary cap tables like 2016.
Yeah, that's the whole point.
And I would just add, people clown on Hollinger. I see like on every Twitter that post that he makes is like, you signed Chandler Parsons to a $94 million contract or whatever it was. Those teams, they needed to spend the money. Like, people have to understand that. Like, there's a floor as well. You have to get over that. Like, once that jump made the 32% increase, like you said, they needed to spend money, and there was only a certain amount of players that they could spend the money on. So
exactly.
It's not like they thought he was a $90+ million player. It was just no smoothing. They had to spend the money. So we have another TV deal coming up, and we would have signed another free agency class like 2016. But obviously now we have smoothing, and it's exciting for me, I think.
I want to go back to the point you brought up about Draymond Green having a problem with this. I'm also a little bit confused as to why he had a problem, because if you think about it, what happened in 2016-17 is one free agent class got a huge boost in salaries.
Exactly.
The following class did not see that increase. So you're really just kind of creating an imbalance between free agent classes when it comes to the amount of money they can make. So for Draymond, I mean, yeah, it could benefit you in 1 year. If you hit free agency in 1 year, you could definitely see a benefit. But let's say you have one more year left on your contract. It's fully guaranteed. You don't have any options. You're pushed to the next year. All of a sudden, wow, salary cap only went up by 5% or 10%.
Yep.
So instead of getting like a $24 million boost in the salary cap, we're looking at somewhere more in the lines of like 6 to 8 million, something like that, 10 at the
Right.
most. So
And people, yeah,
I'm confused at why he was
right.
opposed to that. Did he explain that? I don't know if you were able to figure that out, but
Not really. It was more just like the players lose again, where I just truly didn't understand that. And I think he was looking for a reason to think that the players were losing. But
interesting.
this is exciting, especially because it just yeah, I mean, it just means that a lot of the casual fans, people that their biggest thing that they always talk about is, oh, the players are moving around too much. Like you like a player, not a team, and all this stuff, and it's not fun to watch because they're on a different team every year. Um, I think that this will affect that because you know what you're going to get in free agency now. You don't have to wait to a new TV deal. You don't have to wait until what the projected numbers are going to be. Um, you know, teams have the same amount of money that they were able to spend last year that it now this year. So is free agency as important as a player, for your future? It doesn't make sense to resign and take that extension or that option, or do you go to free agency? I think it's going to have a lot more implications on that sense, especially like what the agents and players decide, um,
Mm-hmm.
as well as what the team obviously has to decide now based on the amount of money they get for each offseason.
Yep, all good points. And like you said earlier, we have to remember that any increase or decrease in the salary cap influences a lot of other numbers in the league. It's not just the cap, it's those exceptions, it's the tax and everything like that. So it's not just like, oh, this player's salary, his player's next contract is going to go up and down. It's the other numbers as well, which influence the next contract. So, I mean, it's all kind of intertwined for
Right,
sure. So,
and then on top of that, we've talked about it. The market dictates your worth.
yep.
Kyrie knew that, and that's why when the Nets weren't going to sign the extension he wanted to be traded
Hmm.
because he knows that when he hits free agency, that money that could have been there from the Mavericks with now Mavericks with the bird rights, um, it's not going to be there in the open market. No one wants to pay him
Right.
that, and but so now knowing what the cap increase is going to be each offseason, it's going to be concrete and it's going to go with everything else. It's going to make a lot more sense for players to understand that. And going back a few years when Kyrie had that extension on the table from the Nets, he could definitely think about it more because he knows
Hmm.
what it's going to look like in the future. So you wouldn't see that happen where someone requests a trade specifically because they know they would lose a lot of money in the free agency value.
Good point as well. Yeah, I mean, all these guys we're talking about here that will be significantly impacted by the cap smoothing. I mean, we're talking about high impact players, obviously. Kyrie Irving is one of them. We're talking about the Damian Lillards of the world. These guys, they sign a contract that's above and beyond most players in the league. It's called a supermax contract, and right now there is a limit of two supermax contracts on a
It's
team,
true.
which was also rectified, if you want to call it that, in the next CBA. But the league introduced removal of that limit, so you're no longer limited to two supermax contracts. I see a clear pro and con to this. I mean, the pro is that it gives you more leverage, it gives you more power to retain your own guys. So
Right.
whether that's
Right.
someone you trade for, like a Donovan Mitchell that's already under contract, or it's a guy coming up on a next contract like Evan Mobley for the Cavaliers, something
Right.
like that. If you already have two and another guy's coming through the pipeline, because that's their situation, you already have Garland, you already have Donovan Mitchell. Now here comes Mobley. He's been Defensive Player of the Year caliber 2 years in a row. He almost won Rookie of the Year last year. He's been making steady strides. It looks like he's approaching that max contract territory here in the next year or so. So now they can pay him the full supermax, which is
Yep.
great. But of course, we've seen in the past that supermaxes can be detrimental to a team's books because that amount of money, like think about Rudy Gobert. Think about how poorly this is going to age over the next 3 years. It
Right.
can really hamstring your team's ability to spend. So I think it's a double-edged sword. I think it's a good and a bad thing. It just depends on who the team decides to use supermax on. If you use it on the wrong player, I mean, you could really burn yourself. But at least they have more
Absolutely.
flexibility. So if they want to, they could offer up more of these supermax contracts.
Absolutely. And this is something that was a rule in place where, like, when Ben Simmons was being floated around, like, the Warriors weren't able to trade for him because they had Andrew Wiggins, they had Stephen Curry, and that was the same thing. And I remember in like 14, 13 or whatever, the Bulls couldn't trade for Blake Griffin because of Derrick Rose and
Yep.
Joe Rose. So, I was always sad about that one. I thought that it was going to be awesome.
That would have been
But
interesting.
yeah, I think this shows, like, I think someone tweeted it out that the Cavs were the clear winner of this new cap, where they can now give Mobley the same deal that Garland and Mitchell got, and retain their talent. I just think it's a common theme with the owners and with the league. It's that they want to keep players where they got drafted. Now having this out of there, you have if you get a first round pick, you have that player for 4 years, and then you sign an extension, and you can give them the supermax. That's already 9 years of their career, and that's exciting to see. And I don't know. I do definitely understand what you're saying, where it could backfire, and now they can't really use it in negotiations. The agent, like, we can't give you the supermax. Like, now the agent will just go look for the supermax instead. But I also think it's players that are worth a supermax, and their homegrown talent, they get to retain that. So I think it's just more add-ons to make that happen.
It is a clear win for those homegrown talents, and yeah, I mean, I think the fact that they added in this new type of contract in the previous CBA was the same is for the same reason.
Yeah,
That's where it originated. Like the fact that we didn't have a supermax contract, it wasn't always a thing, but teams. I mean, the league wanted to give teams another measure beyond just a normal max contract to entice guys to stay. That's where Gobert came in. That's where Damian Lillard came in, the Bradley Beal, the guys that got
yeah,
those contracts. We keep going back to John Hollinger. I wanted to reference another one of his topics again here, but he always mentions the fact that because Lillard and Beal got these huge contracts. I mean, they're getting over in excess of $40 million a year now.
yeah,
Pretty soon it'll be 50 million when they're in their in their 30s.
right.
It's kind of hamstrings them. And you look at both teams and the fact that neither of them have been able to get out of mediocrity for the past several years. I mean, there's other factors involved. It's not just that, but he continues to go back to the fact that a supermax contract is kind of keeping the team not bad, and they're not bad teams. Like the Blazers this season, they kind of just gave up on their season. But
Yeah,
overall, it kind of limits their ability to, I guess, regroup. And I think part of that also is because of the way they've drafted. I don't think they've drafted very well over the past few years. I think specifically the Wizards have been a victim of this. But he does mention that, and I think it can be an obstacle if you don't use it the right way. But
yep.
it all depends on how you use it. I guess is what it comes back to, what it comes down to.
That makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. It just puts another piece on the puzzle where the teams have to figure it out.
You absolutely do. You absolutely do. But it is cool that there's going to be a better chance of guys sticking with their original team year
Yep.
after year. That is definitely a clear win for the league. I do like that. Last couple topics here before we get to the sad story of a certain team in the Texas area. Real quick, want to go over these. This is an increase in qualifying, a 10% increase in qualifying offers that players can sign after they hit that fourth year in their contract. You can stick around for a fifth year if you do accept the qualifying offer that you can get from a team. In doing so, you can skip restricted free agency, and after year 5, you can enter unrestricted free agency. This is very rare. I don't think we hardly ever see this done
Yeah.
because you're taking you're taking a pretty big pay cut in year 5. Instead of just going into restricted free agency and getting a whole new contract, like an offer sheet from another team or just the team you've been playing for, you're taking a contract that's worth way less, more than likely, and you're taking a gamble because what if something happens in year 5? Now you're no longer going to get that max contract the next year. So maybe teams want to give players more of an opportunity to possibly hit unrestricted free agency, make it more
Yep.
realistic. So now that pay cut that you're taking in year 5 between that new contract you can get and the qualifying offer is smaller. So maybe more players will do that. I don't know if it'll really entice that many players to do that. It still seems like a really big gamble for the opportunity to unrestricted free agency. So I don't know if this will really change much of anything, but it is interesting to see. I did want to acknowledge it because maybe one or two players here and there will do it instead of almost never seeing it as we do now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually love this because I always had a big problem with the restricted free agency, like a restricted contract, like at these days, specifically because we haven't seen offer sheets where the team has to decide if they're gonna, match it or not. Because right now in the NBA, they just make it a sign and trade. Like
Yeah.
there are no more restricted. I think the last one I saw was Bogdanovich with
Yeah.
the Kings and Hawks, where the team decided not to match it. Like
Mm-hmm.
there hasn't been that, and the sign and trade was not the reason why the restricted free agency occurred. It was another thing where to kind of keep talent with you. You got the bird rights. You can match any offer, and you weren't supposed to just turn any of them into sign and trades. Um,
Right.
so this new percent of qualifying offer and also lowering the amount of time you have to match it to 24 hours instead of 48, it just makes a lot more
Yes.
sense. It
Mm-hmm.
puts a lot more emphasis on the actual contract, uh, like decisions rather than just taking 2 weeks and making it a sign and trade. Also,
Right.
would make sense because the NBA had a problem when teams like the Bulls and Pelicans already agreed to a sign and trade before the free agency actually, like
Yep.
moratorium actually happened. So
Yep.
I like this. I think there's a lot of underlying things that this solves.
It does. I think specifically when it comes to the match limit, it was 3 days. Way back several years ago, it was a 3 day timeline that teams had to match an offer or not. So what that meant was if you submitted an offer sheet to a player, you want to try to poach him from that team, the team that player was signed to previously, they can take their sweet time in matching
Yep.
it. So your money is tied up. You're kind of limited to what else you can do. So free agents start to fly off the board, and you're sitting here tied up for 3 days. You can't really do anything because your money is pending trying to get that restricted free agent. They shortened it to 2 days. I think that was I can't remember if it was the beginning of the last CBA or maybe a little bit after that, but they shortened it to
Yeah.
2 days. And then now we're down to 1 day. So now I think it's less of a risk for teams that want to sign a guy and restrict their free agency because now instead of your money being tied up for, because I mean, free agency is fast, like it's fast paced thing. Within
Absolutely.
2 days, the biggest talents are off the board. So now that it's going down to 1 day, I mean, you might not think it's a big deal, people listening to this podcast, but I mean, 1 day is a huge deal because one
Huge.
day can be the difference between getting a big guy in free agency and completely missing out.
Yep.
So I do like the fact that they did this, um, which is pretty cool. And then, one other real quick thing before we move into the playoffs here is the fact that teams no longer have to use a mid-level exception to sign second rounders. I think that's
Yep.
pretty cool as
Yep.
well. So now if you want to
There's going
have
to
a
be a
second round
specific
pick,
exception. Yeah.
yes, it's a second round exception. So it's already a thing for first rounders. So they're just automatically assigned a certain contract value on a team's books as soon as that the pick is made. Um, Now the same applies to second rounders. So it's built in. So if you're over the tax, you're over the cap, you don't have to allocate more money from your mid level that you could use to sign free agents just to sign a second rounder that may or may not even pan out. He may not
Yep.
be a guy that sticks around for a while, but now there's an exception built in. So you're still spending money on that guy, but it doesn't come from that preset mid-level exception. We just talked about it. It's a pretty valuable
Yep.
resource. You don't have to pull from it in order to sign second rounders to the rookie contracts. So I did like that. I want to acknowledge that. It's a small detail, but I think it's very important to
Yep.
pretty much every team in the league.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
So let's do it, man. I mean, we don't have glasses of wine here, but we can just kind of imagine that we have a glass and we can pour one out for the Mavericks here. But As of last night, the Dallas Mavericks have been eliminated from playoff contention. First time missing the playoffs since 2019. Uh, this trade was a complete failure, I think, by any stretch of the imagination. The team went about 10-17 or so since the trade. Just a terrible mark. They ended up. They're probably going to be about 11th in the conference. Here's the kicker, though. They keep their pick this year. It's a protected pick going to New York from the Porzingis trade. If it's top 10, they clinch the 10th worst record in the league if they lose tomorrow, which is Sunday. So you already know no one's going to play that game. It's going to be Josh Green. It's going to be Jalen Hardy. It's going to be the absolute bottom of the bench guys, two-way players. I mean, they're going to play no one in that game because they want to clinch that 10th worst record. But I want to see. I can't wait for the draft. I really can't wait for the draft. I want to see if they keep this pick. There's a nightmare scenario in which the Mavs lose their pick. Let's say it's 11th. They can get the 11th pick.
Absolutely.
And they lose their pick. And Kyrie does one of these, the peace out, and says, I'm off to a new team. What do the Mavs do after that? We talked about it last night. They will have some cap room. But you can't sign a star that's going to be able to really help you compete for a championship with $20 million. I just really think they're kind of stuck not having a first-round pick. I mean, we had a podcast about this when the trade was made, and we all agreed that it was a high-risk move. This is what happens when you sign Curry. It could blow up in your face, and unfortunately for the Mavericks, it's looking like it might go down that way.
Yep. I think you're spot on. I think you get an unbelievable talent, Kyrie. And we talked about this, who they gave up. There was a lot of risk, as their roster was created. Dorian Finney-Smith and Spencer Dinwiddie, those were important pieces, specifically on the defensive end. And you give those up to go get Kyrie, and obviously your offense is going to improve, but you will not be able to stop anyone, especially if there's no heart in the defense. I mean, looking at it, the opponents averaged 5 more points against them than they did when Dorian Finney-Smith, Spencer Dinwiddie was on the court, shot the ball better, 49.2% on average against them in the last few games of the season, 34% from 3. I mean, it was slim pickings for people that were playing the Mavs, and especially if the offense couldn't go, if they needed a few games under their belt, which any new front court or back court's going to need. You're already behind the 8 ball.
Right.
And it was a great move on paper. But no, you lost really pivotal pieces, especially defensively. And now you need to make the decision where you obviously with the decision they had, I'd probably also choose the decision of just trying to get that 9th pick now instead of going to the play-in and potentially losing. And then, they would have to play 2 games in the play-in and then go to play the Nuggets in a 7-game series. Like, I totally get their decision, but it's sad. It's sad I had to go to that. And, like we talked about, Kyrie obviously leaving would still give them some flexibility this summer, but Luka needs help, and you're very close to a time where he's requesting out. So
it's been rumored that he could ask for a trade as soon as next summer if things don't get significantly better.
He's really nice. He's giving them 1 year to figure it out. So
yeah, I mean, good for him. I mean, it's not like he's going to have 2 more years left on his contract or anything, but good on him for doing that. This is kind of the times we're living in. I mean, time left on the contract means nothing.
Yeah.
If you're a guy of Lucas caliber, I mean, you can break free from a team with 4 years. I mean, KD did it with 4 years left on his contract. His contract hadn't even started yet.
I mean, look at Kyrie. It's his 3rd team he did it to. So
yeah, I mean, it's just the way things are going these days with player empowerment, and it's really unfortunate for the Mavericks because they were having a pretty decent season before the trade. It wasn't like they were looking like they were going to be as good as last year, losing Brunson.
But they were a playoff. Yeah.
They were a playoff team. They were the 6th seed before the trade. When the trade was made, they fell to 11. And that defense did get pretty bad. I mean, they went from 24th which was, wasn't great, but they went to 26th post trade. So they were definitely one of the worst defensive teams. The only teams you would find in the league that were worse than the Mavericks were probably the lottery bound teams. So
Mm-hmm.
probably got teams like Indiana and San Antonio and Charlotte.
Yep.
So just very, very poor from that end of the floor. And interested to see if they hang on to Jason Kidd. What they do with Christian Wood's free agency,
Yep.
Kyrie's free agency. Uh, there's a lot of important pieces hitting free agency. There's a lot of big decisions to make. Not even including Luka. Not thinking about Luka at all. Just those other ancillary pieces. We're gonna have to see how that goes down for them. So keep a close eye on them. There could be an implosion in
That's
Dallas
for
there.
sure. I think it already is kind of on implosion watch because I mean,
Yeah.
last night you see them almost hit on a game winner, and then the camera pans to Mark Cuban, and he has that little smirk on his face that they missed it. It's a tough situation, and I'm surprised the NBA is not really getting involved. I know that they know that the last few games this happens, and I feel like in any sport that happens because it's like 2 games left, and it has serious implications, especially with protected picks. So
Yeah.
um, it's just it's definitely hard to watch. I would be surprised if Kidd is back. I was surprised if they keep the same front office. We'll see. It was, I think you can't. I mean, you can fault them for the Kyrie trade. Absolutely. I mean, everyone told them what would happen. But looking at it on paper, yeah, I get why they did it. But
It makes sense.
yeah, it's Kyrie. I don't.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
I do hate that teams are resting their guys down the stretch, but I don't think there's really any way to kind of police that really well
Yeah.
because teams will call it an injury,
Right.
because like they call it an injury, you're like, how do you prove it or not? You can't really prove if it's an injury or not. They'll say injury management. They'll say sore
Right.
ankle, like sprained ankle. Maybe they did get hurt and they've been playing, but they act like it's injury maintenance and they don't want to play. There's
Well,
so many
yeah,
different
and
loopholes with
now
that.
this game truly doesn't matter, and the team knows, and the NBA knows that. So if this guy's actually hurt, or they can make the claim he is, playing a unnecessary game obviously wouldn't make sense.
Right. No, exactly. That's what it comes down to. So we'll see, man. We'll see. But unfortunate for the Mavs, who were looking pretty good before the trade.
Yeah.
On to some better news, though, when it comes to playoff matchups. There are several teams that are either fighting for playoff positioning or they're just flat out locked in seeds. Starting with the East here, real quick, to kind of wrap things up. Cavaliers Knicks is the first matchup I'm looking at for the East. That's going to be
I'm so
really good.
excited. Honestly, I keep going back and forth every day what this should look like. Sensing a 7-game series and sensing a gritty Donovan Mitchell,
Yeah,
memorable nights in the Garden.
Oh man,
I
that's
really
gonna be
feel like the
beautiful.
Cavs just have too much, but the Knicks just keep showing up when we think they're not. So you
Yeah,
never know. Yeah, and I think it's going to be one of the best. I think it's going to be the best first round matchup. Absolutely.
I do too. I predicted Cavs in 7. That's where I wanted my prediction. So I'm
Yep.
with you on the 7-game series. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the Knicks pulled this one out, though. I
Right.
mean, we saw Brunson in
Exactly.
the last year's playoffs. In three playoff series, he was amazing. Luka missed, I think, a large majority of the first round series last year
Yeah.
during the playoffs for the Mavs, and Brunson took over. I mean, he was like, "Hey, we don't have Luka, but I'm that guy. I
Yep.
can go out
Yep.
there and get fourth quarter buckets. I can get tough buckets." He's built for the playoffs. If you think about it, just
Yep.
because he's a smaller guy, yeah, but he's strong. He's tough. He can get into the paint. He doesn't rely on a lot of jumpers. When the game slows down, he can still make a lot of good shots for himself.
Yeah.
Impeccable footwork. Just not afraid of the moment. I mean, he's going to be such a pivotal piece for that team. And on the flip side, the Cavs have that in Donovan Mitchell. I mean, he's had some spectacular playoff series. I mean, he had a
I
playoff
mean,
series where he was scored 40 and 50 points in the bubble every game. So I mean,
honestly, if people don't give him credit, without the year that Embiid and Jokic had, he played like an MVP this year. I like
oh yeah,
70 points, like 4 40-point games in a row. Like he was unbelievable.
sensational.
Unbelievable.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I
absolutely
think,
sensational.
I think it makes sense. And I think looking at it, it's easy to say that the backcourt's going to be the X factor for here because of the two very strong backcourts with, Quickly and Brunson and then Garland and Mitchell. I think it's going to be they're gonna all get theirs, all four of those guys. They're gonna get their buckets. I think it's gonna come
Hmm.
down to that front court. Can
Yeah.
Mobley become an offensive, force? Can he, get Mitchell Robinson in foul trouble? Can Julius Randle shoot the ball efficiently? Can he defend Mobley? Can Jared Allen become an impact offensively and not just defensively? Like, if those things could happen, it's going to have a huge swing on the series because when you have two unbelievable backcourts like that, it's hard to say that they're going to be the X factor. It's hard to say, in a playoff series, making a whole defensive strategy based on those guys because it's the side guys that are going to make a huge thing. I think Josh Hart's going to be a huge X factor in this for the Knicks, especially
Oh yeah.
keeping out of foul trouble. It's there's so many parts that are so minuscule that are going to be really really important in this series
Yeah,
in
look,
a playoff
there's
series.
gonna be exactly, man. I mean, you look across the different teams, you look at the different matchups there's gonna be. I'm with you. That front court for Cleveland is gonna be huge because we know what they can bring to the table defensively. Those guys, that's a big reason why the Cavs are, top three defense this year. They've been
Yeah,
spectacular on that end. I wonder if they can contain Randall in the front court. That's gonna be something big to watch. On the flip side, I wonder what the Knicks are gonna throw at Darius Garland to slow him
yeah,
down. I mean, Garland and Mitchell, that backcourt is going to be key. The Knicks are not exactly a defensive stopper type of team, but
yeah,
I mean that offense still is going to be formidable. And that Josh Hart signing, I think for them, just really kind of boosted them into another tier from where they
absolutely.
were at before. I think it was a A1 signing. It was exactly what they needed. That it fits Thibodeau's culture to a T,
Yep.
just from everything he brings, from a cutting, rebounding, the little things perspective. I mean, excellent pickup. Uh, the one last question for me is, what do the Cavs do with that fifth starter? I wonder if
Yeah.
they go Okoro to start, maybe Levert closes the game, or maybe Lamar Stevens gets some run. They've
Yep.
shifted through a lot of guys at the three position. They don't have a long term answer, but I wonder if from game to game, from quarter to quarter, that shifts a little bit because that's a
Yeah.
question mark. It's the only one big question mark for that team. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on, as well as how that three position just kind of rotates and changes throughout what we expect to be a long series.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, they're going to have to get some guys that are ready to go off that bench. They definitely have one of the shallower, benches in the East, I'd say. It's definitely close, but having guys like even like Seti or Dean Wade, like those are definitely important. And are if someone could step up, it's going to be the next man up. Okoro is obviously what they thought would be their future three, and he hasn't really shown up that like that. But you're going to have to get creative if that's playing Mitchell to three and playing a smaller guard with Garland at the top, or playing bigger and putting Dean Wade at the three. It's going to be interesting to see what they do.
Absolutely. Aaron, give me one more either confirmed or potential Eastern Conference matchup that you are really looking forward to.
Yeah, I think that the Nets Sixers is even though it's like the Nets have lost a lot, I think it's still going to be a really exciting matchup. I still
For
think that
sure.
they have a gritty, hard nosed team, you know, defensive minded, and are just going to be up in Joel Embiid's face. And I, we've seen Doc Rivers and Joel and all the Sixers have a few problems in the playoffs recently, and I like it's still an exciting matchup to me to see, do the Sixers have it? Like, are they going to sweep the Nets? Are they going to just go in with this mentality? This is the year. We got Joel the MVP. Like now, like let's actually do something with the roster we created.
Hmm.
And so we'll see.
That matchup is a big one as well. I think it's going to be a good litmus test for the Sixers
Yeah,
as far as
exactly.
how serious are they about winning
Yeah,
a
right.
championship? If
Exactly,
they go into the
exactly.
series and win in 4 or 5 games, okay, all right, they mean business. Keep an eye on them. That this might be their year.
Yep.
If they go into that series and they struggle, 6 game series. I mean, I highly doubt it'd be 7 games, but
But if
even
yeah,
if it's a
if it gets there,
yeah, I
it's
mean
not
that's a
good.
red
Yeah,
flag for me because as good as the Nets are right now, I mean they're the 6th seed, they're no pushover. Mikal Bridges has had a spectacular year. He's gone into that franchise and averaged about 25 a game since he got there. I mean, that's very impressive.
Yeah,
But there's so many ways you can exploit that team. They don't have a lot of star power. Um, they don't they don't have a lot of. I mean, Claxton is a great player in his own right, but I mean, Embiid should absolutely dominate him
yeah,
from tip to the close of the game. Uh, they just they still trying to figure some things out. I mean, they don't have a complete roster. I think knows how to play with each other yet. The defense is not spectacular. I just think that the Sixers should go in there, really make a statement, and say, "Hey, you guys are good. You're a solid team, but this is our time to shine." That's what I'm looking
absolutely.
for. And B, continue that trajectory. Harden continue because Harden last year, for the second year in a row, he was up and down. Harden needs to be that 20 and 10 guy, 10 assists. That's the psychic to Embiid. And he has moments where he's Harden, Rockets
Yep,
Harden, where he goes in there
yep,
and carries the scoring load. That's what they should be putting on display for us if they really want to be in the same class as the Bucks and the Celtics. On paper, they are. They just have to prove it. That's all they have left to do.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's totally true. And it's why it's an exciting matchup. If they can go in there and dominate for 4 games, that really changes the whole Eastern Conference. And I just don't think the Bucks could legitimately not care, but really look at them as a huge threat based on the last few years. But if they really go into a matchup with a gritty, hard-nosed Nets team, they really haven't lost that much of a step since their huge trade. They have a huge future, but there's a lot of it is not dependent on their success. It's dependent on the Rockets' success or the Suns' success. So, being able to just go out there and play freely with all these young guys, it could be a recipe for disaster for the Sixers, or it could be a good litmus test, like you said.
The Nets, like you said, have. I mean, they have nothing to lose.
I
They
mean, they're
by a lot of
good.
counts shouldn't even be here. So I mean, they're going to play fast and free. And I can't wait to see Bridges what he can bring to that playoff series. See if he continues
Absolutely.
his hot run. Uh, Real quick, West playoff series here, man. I think the number one series that a lot of us are circling as far as the bracket goes is the 4-5 matchup. As of today, this could change tonight because it
Yeah.
changes every day. Suns and Warriors, man. I just can't tell you how excited I am for this series. KD
Yeah.
and Golden State. Just think about that atmosphere. That's going to be electric if that goes down that way. The Suns haven't lost a game with KD in the lineup. The Warriors are starting to get their pieces back. Wiggins should be back for the playoffs. Their side pieces, their bench guys have an up and down season, but I think Jordan Poole. I want to see if that home away discrepancy stays in place because if it does, this could be a long series. If the Warriors are as
Absolutely.
good at home as they've been in the past 42, 41 home games, where they had the top 2, 3 home record in the entire league, if they win both home games, they go into Phoenix, they completely turn into a completely different team. They lose both those games, 6 or 7 game series. I mean, get your
Yeah.
popcorn ready. I mean, I
Right.
can't wait to see that.
Absolutely. And it's obviously as exciting as it gets getting KD in the West again, now going into the Warriors in the playoff series. And, with Klay Thompson coming out today saying they're unbeatable if they're healthy, like, um, that would be really exciting, especially Chris Paul and Stephen Curry dynamic. We've seen that last few years. It'll be
Yeah.
a nice one. I'm looking at, I mean, I'm not going to toot my own horn, but I really love the Kings going into this year, and they've
Okay.
even surpassed my expectations. It's been unbelievable to watch. It's so exciting. Light the beam. It's so fun to see the city of Sacramento have a team like that right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really
Great.
excited to see that potential with the Clippers. I mean, if going back a month or two, that 2 overtime game where it was like close
Oh,
to the record between them.
176,
I mean,
175.
yeah, I mean, if we get a few games that obviously not that size, but that kind of just atmosphere. I mean, come on, that's awesome.
We're in
That
for
that
a treat.
yeah. So I also just am so excited to see Sacramento. It's so loud just in the normal regular season. I'm so excited to see their playoffs atmosphere. It's gonna be awesome.
Man, it's going to be like the Knicks. I want to
Yeah,
say 2 years ago or so when they
Yeah,
made the playoffs. They played the Hawks that first round, and Madison Square Garden was electric. It's gonna be
electric.
that
Absolutely.
same thing. I mean, this team has not made the playoffs. I'm guys. I'm 29 years old. I'm about to be 30 this year. They haven't made the playoffs since I was 13. Like, I'm just starting to think
Like,
about that, and I'm just
like,
like,
yeah, like,
it's hard to understand.
seriously, seriously. I mean, that's
it
insane to think about.
unbelievable,
So,
unbelievable.
yeah,
That the atmosphere is going to be electric. I do think it's going to be. I do think it's going to be more of a shootout. I
yeah.
mean, not to the
I,
degree that we saw in the regular season, but the Kings don't play a lot of defense. The Clippers can play some defense when they want to, but
yeah,
it
it's
comes
gonna
and
come down
goes.
to who's healthy. Who's healthy?
It really is.
I mean,
Paul George is a big
who's
question mark. Paul
yeah,
George, he might have just ruined my whole fantasy season, not taking shots or anything.
yeah,
But I
obviously.
was in the fantasy playoffs when he hyperextended his leg, and it was ruled out for 2 weeks or so there. So that hurt me. But I'm still rooting for him to come back for the series, be 100%, because the Clippers are going to need him. They're in for a fight. The
Yep,
Kings are no joke, as they
yep,
displayed. This isn't a blip. This isn't a flash in the pan. They have
yep.
a legitimate two-man action with Fox and Sabonis. They have great guard play. Keegan Murray, over 200 threes in his rookie season. It's more than Damian Lillard and guys like that. Malik Monk and a lot of guys at the
And they
two
all just
position
want
coming
it.
in. They
They
do.
all just want it.
They're hungry. I can
Someone
see
like Mike
why.
Brown
I mean,
has instilled such a great chemistry and such a great environment that,
oh yeah,
he's my coach of the year, um,
I like
unanimously.
the pick. I like the pick.
Um,
Third seed. I mean, hey,
yeah,
it's not like we're picking a team that's set 6-7. I mean, these guys
yeah.
have won a lot of games.
A few episodes ago, I said, if they can stay up there in the top three, it's without a doubt he's my coach of the year. So,
I'll give it to him
um,
too, man. I don't
yeah,
care what Budenholzer has done at the one seed or Mike Malone. Like, give
yeah,
me the Kings, man. I mean, they were supposed to
absolutely.
win 30 games or 35, let alone almost 45. I mean,
Yeah, they just
that's
won the
incredible.
Pacific, like unbelievable.
No
And
one, I don't think even Kings fans would expect them to
yeah,
finish with a better record than the Lakers, the Clippers, the Warriors, all those teams. There's no
exactly.
way, man. That's
Yeah,
incredible.
and so, I would say it's a tough feat to have to play the Clippers in the sixth seed, but that's kind of what the West is now.
Yeah.
Have an amazing season and you're the three seed, and who do you have to play? Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. Like,
The Wild
okay, like
West.
what what was the incentive in getting the three seed? But you know, I think they could do it, but it's gonna come down to injury. I mean, if you back to on paper, like with the Sixers, like the Clippers should easily beat the Kings, but they have had a lot of problems this year. Uh, Surprisingly, they haven't looked like anything like a championship contender. Um, but on paper they are, and it's going to be interesting to see if do they get that kind of dynamic coming into a playoff series with the Kings, or the Kings keep rolling as they are.
That's what it comes down to, man. That's what it comes down to. We're gonna have to wait and see. Only a few days left, and then
Yeah,
the play-in tournament will commence. So a lot more series to look at, man. As we get into our future podcast, we will definitely do more of a deep dive on specific series as they are locked in. As of this recording, we still have a few matchups in the West yet to be determined. There's about 4 seeds over there. They're still have to shift positions. So we'll be back definitely for another episode. We'll get into East and West and look at how the first round is gonna shake out. But Aaron, thanks again, man, for hopping on. Another great episode.
absolutely.
Always glad to chop it up with you, man. Great times here. If you guys are looking for resources, league resources such as cap sheets, you can take a look at the cap
Trade
space for your
machine.
favorite teams. Trade Machine is up to date for 22-23. That's going to be updated as we get into the off season. If you want to look at the apron, the luxury tax that we were looking at, those numbers are updated on our site. When we get into the summertime and those numbers are updated, we will update that on our site. All that stuff is available for you over at notradecalls.com. All of our podcasts are there, other resources, so definitely be sure to check that out.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
Mavs fans get to just stare at their cap sheet, see what they think the team could do.
right. Exactly. Just try to just hope and pray that the worst case scenario doesn't shake out for them. We're praying for you guys. We're hang in there. Hang in there.
Yeah.
So on that note, guys, we're signing out. Aaron and Aaron, we'll catch you guys in the next podcast. Thanks for tuning in. enjoy this play-in tournament here as it gets underway. And we'll be back here next week with another exciting episode of NTC. So take care, guys. We'll see y'all soon.